In the spring of 2025, a volunteer group dedicated to finding disappeared people in Mexico entered a remote ranch. A drug cartel had allegedly used the ranch as a training camp and killing site. The group found human remains and personal items. The world has seen countless images like these. Drug cartels have had Mexico in a chokehold for decades. The government is weakened by corruption and is seen as powerless by victims' families.
The drug cartels make the rules, and the government does what it's told.
Mexican drug gangs are part of a global network with roots stretching from South America to Asia, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Pacific region. They work like global empires, with Mexico as their central hub and the US as their main market. The business is worth billions. It fuels violence in Mexico and boosts the number of drug-related deaths in the US.
And we're going to stop the drugs from coming in, believe me. They're sending...
And while the US has imposed economic sanctions, it continues to ignore its own complicity in the drug problem. Why has the crisis escalated to this point? Mexico has been fighting an international system of smuggling, violence, and corruption for decades in vain. Cartels rule this system with brutality, smuggling hard drugs through tunnels, shipping containers, and human bodies. In movies or television series like Narcos, drug lords are portrayed as anti-heroes, as cool and larger than life. But for people in Mexico, the drug war isn't fiction. It's a question of life or death. So, who are the real narco bosses? And how have they brought an entire country to its knees? Mexico is large. It's dynamic, well-connected, culturally diverse, and stunningly beautiful. It's also a country of great social inequality, where poverty is at its worst. Drug cartels recruit young men with promises of recognition, promotion, and economic prospects. According to a 2023 study, up to 185,000 people work directly or indirectly in the Mexican drug trade. If the cartels were legal companies, they would be one of Mexico's biggest employers, and the drug trade would comprise 2% of GDP.
So it is this parallel world in which, you can have a drug lab in the city where people are going to work.
In 2023, fighting the cartels and the effects of violence cost Mexico around 4.9 trillion pesos, around a fifth of its GDP. The Mexican government has been keeping an especially close eye on Tijuana. The city on the Mexican-US border is home to the world's busiest border crossing, making it a hub for contraband. Drugs are smuggled in one direction and weapons in the other. Smuggling and the violent crime that goes along with it make Tijuana one of the most dangerous cities in the world. This map shows Mexico's murder rate in 2024. The darker the red, the higher number of murders. The grim frontrunner is a small village located directly on a smuggling route.
The community of Dr. Coss awoke on Tuesday in the midst of a battle between drug cartels operating in Nuevo León. The terror spread within minutes.
There were 15 murders in Dr. Coss in 2024 and 23 the year before. The village became known nationwide when two cartels fought a battle using around a dozen custom-built armored vehicles known as narco-tanks. It's been caught in the crossfire between rival gangs for years. The town hall is riddled with bullet holes. This is a war with no clear front lines, but with horrific numbers. In recent years, average homicide numbers in the country have reached 30,000 deaths annually, around 80 every day. Since 2006, 400,000 people have been murdered. Figures like those are what you see in war zones. How did it reach this point?
One piece of that is access to high caliber weapons, AK-47s, AR-15s, even 50 caliber weapons, grenade launchers, grenades. They're importing these types of weapons by the dozens and dozens. And so it's not just that they have one or two, but it's that they can essentially build small militias.
Marco Alcocer is an assistant professor at the University of California, Merced. His research focuses on organized crime in Mexico.
Simply operating an illegal economy means that you don't have the state to fall back on to enforce contracts. And so there is an underlying sense that violence is a requirement, or at least the threat of violence is a requirement.
Mexico is home to numerous cartels and local players. The underworld is a patchwork of rival gangs in constant flux as power struggles develop and new alliances emerge. Controlling drug routes is the key to dominance. These are not only smuggling routes, but also corridors of violence and crime. The cartels defend them with extreme brutality, meaning that reporting on them can be extremely dangerous for journalists.
My first approach with the violence is because I start in the Red Note.
Vanya Pijanot worked on the investigative podcast The Red Note and as a police reporter for a local newspaper in the state of Guerrero. She now lives in exile in Berlin.
One proof to demonstrate strength was this fragmentation of bodies on the streets. It's not only killed with one shot in the head. It's demonstrate that they had the capacity to kill somebody with a lot of strength. I can kill you many times and send it to your family as a gift. One shocking moment for me, we found a black bag with a body inside as a garbage. And next to the body, the lady from the tacos is selling tacos because it was the morning, 10 a.m. And everybody knows, because everybody noticed these activities to get affectation on the mindset of the people. It's like if you move 1 centimeter, you can be the next victim in this bag.
Year after year, Reporters Without Borders has ranked Mexico as one of the world's most dangerous countries for journalists. Investigating corruption, drug cartels, or human rights violations can prove fatal. Many media professionals live under constant threat. Censorship, intimidation, and violence are part of their everyday lives. Vanya moved to Berlin because she no longer felt safe in Mexico. Thanks to a whistleblower and the hacktivist group Guacamaya, she found that Pegasus spyware had been installed on her phone in 2014. She was spied on for years, likely because of her reporting on the cartels and corruption.
I realized that I was hacked in 2017. And with Guacamaya leaks, I realized that I had a profile with my face, with my name, with all my bylines, with all my most important articles. And if I, as a local journalist, had one profile with the security forces, imagine all the information that they have and who is providing for these kind of profiles.
There was long great hope for Mexico's economic, cultural, and political development. So how then did violence become so deeply entrenched in the country? The history of the drug wars begins here in the northwestern Sinaloa Mountains, better known as Mexico's breadbasket. Detached from the capital, this was a rural area with many farmers. By the early 20th century, opium, and especially heroin, a drug sold by German pharma company Bayer, was commonly sold as medicine. By the time it was banned in the US, millions of Americans were already addicted. Farmers in Sinaloa saw a business opportunity and began secretly growing opium poppies, which resourceful dealers turned into heroin for export.
During the Rock Festival, hundreds of cases of drug overdose and excessive drinking were reported.
Marijuana followed, and the new black market in the U.S. made the Mexican narcos rich.
In the 1960s, maybe as a response to this counterculture with the boom in marijuana use, you get Richard Nixon, who starts what he calls the war on drugs.
America's public enemy number one is drug abuse.
Part of this is the creation of the Drug Enforcement Administration, or the DEA, which increases the pressure on Mexico to do annual eradication campaigns. And this is because the United States has a lot of soft power against Mexico because it is its major trading partner, and they can use this as leverage to then push Mexico to pursue policies that the U.S. wants.
But starting in the mid-1970s, the drug problem got worse. A new drug had appeared on the scene. Cocaine was produced in the Colombian Andes, where Pablo Escobar and his Medellin cartel controlled the market. He smuggled the cocaine in boats and on planes, from Colombia through the Caribbean to South Florida in the United States. The anti-drug authorities clamped down on these routes. So the Colombian cartels found new overland routes right through Mexico. Soon, cartels in both countries had entered profit-sharing business partnerships. In the 1990s, the Colombian cartels were dismantled, and Pablo Escobar was shot and eliminated. A number of new Mexican cartels filled the power vacuum and began waging brutal wars against each other for control of the drug routes. Beheadings, massacres, and battles with the military were commonplace. For the anti-drug authorities, it was deeply frustrating. The start of a cat-and-mouse game that continues to this day. The state seems powerless. One player profited the most from this situation, the Sinaloa cartel. Active in more than 20 Mexican states, it controls key smuggling routes into the U.S. Its decentralized structure makes it difficult for authorities to track. The cartel's boss at the time was the now legendary El Chapo, once Mexico's most powerful drug lord, and a symbol of both the rise and fall of a cartel empire. Here he is in 1993 during his first arrest. Years later, he would escape from prison in a laundry cart. Such blatantly illegal activities finally provoked the government into taking decisive action. In December 2006, the newly elected President Calderón launched Mexico's war on drugs, with domestic military deployment. The cartels were weakened, but the violence escalated.
But this doesn't really stop the flow of drugs going into the US, and it doesn't really get rid of criminal groups. The criminal groups are really innovative, and they can figure out ways to circumvent or adapt to new government policies.
While the drug war raged above ground, El Chapo outwitted the state with a new idea. Kilometer-long tunnels dug under the US border, a system inspired by knowledge from his home state of Sinaloa, a traditional mining region. These drug tunnels made border controls practically useless. Even after El Chapo was rearrested in 2014, his associates dug a tunnel from outside the prison right into his cell. On the evening of July 11, 2015, El Chapo escaped once again.
This is the moment Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán makes the Mexican government look ridiculous.
The world's most powerful drug lord had vanished right under the government's nose. All that remained were these TV images. No one admitted to seeing or hearing anything. But how is that possible?
Court records have shown that These cartels, like the Sinaloa cartel, have monthly budgets in the millions of dollars to hand out to government agencies.
This is how the system worked. Lower-level officials were bribed to allow drug shipments to pass, while investigations were blocked at higher levels. Politicians, judges, and even military personnel received large sums of money to protect the cartel. At the same time, bribes flowed to banks, media outlets, and companies, buying influence throughout society. This network secured the Sinaloa cartel's power for years. For the general public, the full extent of this web of corruption only became apparent in 2014. These are the last images of a group of students training to be teachers from the village of Ayotzinapa. On September 26, 2014, they were abducted by police in the city of Iguala while on their way to a protest. They were later handed over to cartel members. The 43 students disappeared without a trace.
What you end up getting very quickly is somewhat clear evidence that the former mayor and his wife, the current mayor, are implicated in this, that the local military unit is also implicated in this, that municipal police is implicated in this.
For many Mexicans, abducting students crossed a line and they could no longer look away.
The people is nowadays on the streets with many demos, with many march, because the empathy were, oh, students.
While authorities spread false information, critical journalists and activists who wanted to investigate the case were threatened. People protested with the slogan, "Fue el Estado." It was the state. In 2016, El Chapo was arrested once more. This time, to be safe, he was extradited to the US. But by then, the Sinaloa cartel had long been decentralized. With its new bosses, flexible structures, and more business sectors, it was more resilient than ever. Others stepped into El Chapo's place, like his son, Ovidio Guzman Lopez. Here, he's being arrested by police in 2019. The cartel's response was violent. TV footage showed Culiacán, Sinaloa's capital, in the throes of a full-blown street war, with cartel troops terrorizing the city to force Ovidio's release. In the end, the state had to back down. Mexico's president personally ordered Ovidio's release.
Which really illustrates the negotiating power that they can bring to the table by using violence. It's one of these events that really publicly highlights the shortcomings in government policies and also the amount of power, and particularly firepower and manpower, that these cartels have amassed.
A bitter power struggle with no end and no mercy. For many Mexicans, violence has long been a part of everyday life. Anyone can find themselves caught in the crossfire at any time.
We lived here in peace. Crime wasn't as frequent back then.
For years, the Barajas Piña family have been fighting for justice for their two murdered children. On the morning of February 29, 2020, the parents Maria and Javier were in church while their daughter Lupita was running errands in downtown Salvatierra.
It was 10:30, then 11, and I started calling. But she didn't answer her phone or respond to my messages.
The parents filed a missing persons report for their 32-year-old daughter, but the police were slow to investigate. So the family took the search for Lupita into their own hands. Such cases are reported time and again. more than 125,000 people are listed as missing in Mexico. Forced recruitment, human trafficking, collateral damage. Those who vanish are often just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Everyone here is united by the same trauma. Their sons, husbands, or friends have vanished. They poke metal rods into the ground, looking for the odor of decaying bodies.
The Barajas Piña family found their daughter. In October 2020, a mass grave was discovered right in the middle of Salvatierra. Lupita's body was among the dead.
I never would have thought so many had disappeared. There were 80 in that grave, and there are those who are still missing. No one spoke up because everyone was afraid.
But tragedy was to strike the family again. Their son, Francisco, a lawyer, had begun investigating on his own and ended up with a target on his back. He was brutally murdered in the middle of Salvatierra, where his sister Lupita had disappeared.
We are the living dead. They killed us the moment they took him away. So here we are, the living dead, searching for truth and justice in our territory, in our state, in our country, everywhere. Because criminals are running the country, not the government.
Mexico's spiral of violence has been accelerating for decades. These days, it's reached a dangerous new level. The reason is fentanyl, the synthetic drug that has been gaining market share since the 2010s. Production costs are negligible, profits are immeasurable, and the effects are even more deadly. The chemical precursors for fentanyl often arrive in Mexico disguised or mislabeled, imported via fake companies, mostly from China. Or they are reloaded outside the ports in waters too shallow for the Coast Guard boats to reach. The cartels feel untouchable. So untouchable that they flaunt their activities on television. They produce fentanyl using the simplest of means. Each batch is highly concentrated, strong enough to kill thousands.
If you lose this shipment, it's an investment that you've made, and maybe you can't recover. Maybe you end up owing millions and millions of dollars to someone else. So this is when you really start creating incentives for these criminal groups to use more and more violence.
Harder drugs, bigger profits. Violence that fuels more violence. A death spiral that spins faster and faster. Mexico is ready for radical change. In 2018, new president at the time, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, coined the phrase, abrazos no balazos, hugs, not bullets. His strategy was to focus on schools, new jobs, and social programs instead of military operations. But the dream of peace clashed with the world of the cartels, built up over decades with much to lose.
Simply saying, well, we won't directly confront them, leaves them to then be predatory towards whoever they want, because they're not getting arrested.
While Mexico's long-term security strategy has yielded few concrete results, pressure has been growing from the US, which blames Mexico for the fentanyl boom.
The Trump administration is considering drone strikes against the Mexican drug cartels that are importing deadly fentanyl.
When Donald Trump became president for the second time in 2025, he immediately classified 6 drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, possibly opening the door for US military intervention in Mexico.
So it's maybe something that could become a possibility, but it really brings into question the issue of national sovereignty.
Claudia Sheinbaum became Mexico's first female president in 2024. She's been trying to avoid overt conflict with the US. In February 2025, she sent Trump a gesture of appeasement. She handed over Rafael Caro Quintero to the US, a drug lord who was wanted by the DEA for 40 years. And it wasn't just him. Mexico extradited a total of 29 cartel bosses. But could this really be the beginning of the end to the violence? The fact is that Mexico's drug war can only be stopped if the US and other consumer countries accept their own responsibility. The Mexican people are demanding peace and security at last.
There must be justice in our country. As long as no sentences are passed, as long as there is no justice in the country, we will never have stability in any state or anywhere in the Republic.
Mexico needs consequential reforms and international cooperation against the black market and illegal cash streams. Only then can the vicious cycle of violence and drug wars be broken.